Our next panel is all about the excitement of blockchain, and I will introduce Ryan and Suzanne.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. I first wanted to take this opportunity to introduce my guest, Suzanne Ennis. Suzanne is the Senior Vice President of Global Partnerships with Shyft Networks. Shyft Networks is a Toronto-based company that focuses on creating and building technology platforms for the allowing of sharing and authenticating personal information with entities throughout the world. Suzanne, not only is she a certified blockchain specialist, but she's one of the few people in this industry that I've been able to find that has a natural ability to take very complex technologies and explain to non-techies like myself. So we're thrilled to have Suzanne here today. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
My name is Ryan Middleton. I'm a partner in Dentons Banking and Finance Group, and I am passionate about all types of technologies, specifically technologies that can improve the efficiencies of the financial services marketplace. I strongly believe that blockchain, distributed ledger technology, and smart contracts are going to radically change the way certain portions of the financial services industry is run. So for the next 30 minutes, we're going to be talking about how blockchain and distributed ledger technology can be used to store, share information, individuals' personal information amongst multiple entities throughout the world in a safe and secure manner. But before we get into that, Suzanne and I wanted to take this opportunity to invite the audience to respond to a couple of polling questions. The first is, the protection of confidential information is a key concern for most organizations. Do you feel confident that the current technology solutions in place to protect your organization's confidential information are adequate? So it looks like it's neck and neck. So it's pretty darn close. The second question we have is, with respect to your organization's confidential information, do you feel you currently have adequate control of who has access to this information? So once again, it looks like it's a draw or pretty close. So to start things off, we wanted to talk about how financial institutions are currently managing KYC compliance. According to a recent study done by an international accounting firm, financial institutions are spending on average $143 million per year on KYC AML compliance. They're increasing their employee base exponentially to deal with the risks that go along with ensuring KYC AML is dealt with properly. But despite some of the massive increases in the resources that are being put forth by organizations, the average amount of time that it takes an organization to onboard a new client is 26 days, which leads in a lot of cases to frustration with the client. So Suzanne, in a situation where we have so much attention by the organization, so many resources that are being put forth towards trying to solve the KYC AML compliance pain point, why are we still having such a hard time making things more efficient and more quick?
So I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that there just hasn't been a technology that's able to marry the different moving parts within an organization that it takes to onboard a customer, or for all departments to approve as to this person is who they say they are. So if you look at it like the human body, you've got the heart, you've got all the organs that are there and are doing their own functions, but there's no skeletal system to connect all of it and to give a holistic view that's easy for someone to look at and say, okay, that's fine, I'm in, let's bring this person on board. So Shyft Network, I'll tell you a little bit first about what we do. So we're effectively an interoperable, blockchain agnostic, SWIFT-like infrastructure for sharing identity across blockchains, across projects. And we're also SaaS compatible as well. And we started, so my background's in capital markets. My founder is 29 years old. He was mining Bitcoin in 2010, mined something like 98,000 Bitcoin when it was trading at 30 cents. Sold it all when it hit $30 because thought he had hit it big and this was it. But we came up with Shyft because of where we saw the world going. So for those of you who know anything about cryptocurrency, you know that, I mean, it's changed now, but back in the day, it was these Bitcoin maximalists, down with banks, down with governments. I don't need to tell you who I am. Like, you're abusing my data. And we're sitting there looking at people being like, are you guys out your mind? Like, we are not going to ever usurp banks. If anything, we need these guys' money to build the tech that we want to build. So we came up with the idea of creating an infrastructure that can marry the old world with the new world. We don't think crypto can survive on its own without the help of traditional institutions. And at the same time, we can understand that traditional institutions, you guys know you got to change, you know you got to adapt, but you still need some infrastructure that's relatable, and obviously KYC, AML is one of the factors. So that's sort of what we're solving for. But yeah, I mean, in terms of why is it the process still so onerous and insanely costly, is because it's just there's so many silos of data and people that need to come together, but there's not enough skeletal infrastructure, I think, to facilitate it.
I mean, if you gave an example to me before the presentation about how you had to go to one of your banks.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so I'm sure we've all had this. I've been a customer at obviously one of the top 5 Canadian banks for 12 years. I've got, great rating. And I go to open an investment account and I have to go through the entire KYC AML process again. And I'm like, but you know me. Like, Sangeetha, we talk like once every 2 weeks. Like, you know what I'm about. But she still had to take another copy of my passport, another copy of my driver's license that's now sitting in another silo, again, for potential hackers to hack or whatnot. But what blockchain and how Shyft is designed and what we're designed to solve for is, instead of having to take another copy of my passport, another copy of my driver's license, spend the money making sure it's safe, spend the time reviewing those documents, is instead for that, investor edge to be able to go to the head office and say, hey, do you know who this person is? And then that head office provide a stamp of approval saying, yes, I have data on this person. Yes, I'm vouching for them. If you need the documents directly, we can have a permissioned conversation on the side about that. But it's really about reducing silos of data and increasing efficiency, and just in the interest of getting things done, and obviously end user consent and privacy.
So you were talking about previously about the need for there to be sharing of data both within an organization, but also amongst organizations as well.
Sure.
I know that there's various private consortiums that are being created in various parts of the world. And one of the things that Shyft Networks is looking for is the importance of bringing those protocols together. Can you tell us a little bit about how you're doing that and why that is so important?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so this technology is revolutionary, but each protocol, each chain has its own personal strengths. So the Bitcoin chain, for example, it's extraordinarily secure. It is probably one of the most secure chains that have ever been developed. EOS is known for incredible speed and efficiency of porting information. Ethereum, EVM compatibility, I mean, they've been really sort of the godfathers of creating like 90% of the smart contracts that are facilitating some of this blockchain technology. So the importance of being able to not only talk with each other so you can share assets, which is something we facilitate, but also to have a sense as to knowing who you're dealing with. Like if I'm building a project on XYZ platform, even if it's a closed one like Corda or Hyperledger, and I don't want to spend the money, and I don't have, quite frankly, the technical expertise to build something or build a protocol like the Bitcoin network, but so I want to be able to leverage that, but I still want a sense as to at least having a sense as to knowing who I'm dealing with or what they're about. That's sort of what our infrastructure is designed to facilitate. If that answers your question. So
one of the things I found when I was trying to work my way through understanding blockchain and DLT is I found sort of just a simple example of how this technology would work between a customer and a bank. I was hoping you might be able to walk the audience through how that would take place and how the technology of blockchain would make things more efficient. Okay, so I'll use another example. I mean, I don't know how many people in the room here
are paying a lot of attention to the blockchain space or the ICO space, or how there's all these cool projects that are coming out that you can invest in directly yourself. So instead of me, let's say I find an ICO or I find a project that I find really interesting and I want to give them some money, I want to invest. Now these kids who have maybe built this incredible code are really good at building code. Why am I trusting some punk kid to take my passport and protect it? Like, what do I know? What's his internal storage data process like? Like why? Versus instead, I could say, this is who I am, go to my bank, they'll provide you with a stamp of approval saying they know who I am. If auditors come for you saying, do you know who your clients are? You can provide the auditors a stamp of approval saying, you know, Bank of Canada said that, yes, they know who Suzanne Ennis is. If you need the data, go to Bank of Canada and they can relinquish that to you. So that's just sort of one example of many, I think, that we see.
So in that situation, you've got the bank or your bank that's going to be the authenticator to the third party that's looking for the authentication.
Yeah.
What is going to be the motivation for entities that want to be the authenticators? Are they not going to be worried about liability? Who do you foresee in the future being the authenticators, or maybe that's something where there's not going to be a one set? It's going to be open for a lot of people.
Well, it's an opportunity for them to monetize their existing the costs that they're currently incurring to store this data securely. So now, instead of as an entity for me, like a subsidiary onboarding a client or doing the KYC AML, which I think costs $100, I can go to, let's just say, again, the Bank of Canada as an example, and say, hey, do you know this person? Bank of Canada can say, yes, we do, but you're going to pay me $10 for me to provide you with that stamp of approval that I know who this person is. So it's an opportunity for them to monetize their existing stored data. And then the person who's using the data and who needs the data, it's an opportunity for them to cut their costs associated with KYC AML. So obviously, the better your reputation gets for providing this clean data and a timely, attestation of knowing who these people are, the more money you effectively make.
So one of the things I was also trying to struggle with when I was going through this solution is I thought to myself, one of the problems we see out there is that all of this personal information right now is balkanized in various places, sometimes in multiple places within an organization or in multiple organizations themselves, which obviously creates honeypots for people that want to go ahead and try to steal that. How does the blockchain DLT solution reduce that risk that people are going to be able to go after that data?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say that blockchain stops data from being hacked, but it certainly makes improvements on confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data in real time. So, and it's also a very good sort of ingredient in larger systems in order to maintain networks that disincentivize actors from acting maliciously with your data once they are either try to obtain it or once they actually do have it, because now you have a tamper-proof skeleton, a tamper-proof audit trail saying you approved that this data passed from these hands to these hands, or you acquired this data, but did you have this person's consent? Now there's actually an auditable trail. So it's really more so a means of disincentivizing, I think, malicious actors.
So going back to the whole idea of trust anchors, I think that's a really unique idea. What are some of the other things, and I think when we were talking in the past, you were talking about peer ranking systems or certain incentives that the trust anchors could implement or make them want to do a really good job when they're authenticating this personal information?
Well, so for one, data monetization, but there's also a bigger... Again, a lot of the organizations that we work with, we do work with quite a few governments. Like, for example, the Philippines, they have an extraordinary amount of unidentified peoples. So, and there's actually about 1.7 billion people in the world who have zero access to identity documentation. So we look at this infrastructure as an opportunity for not only people with no formal identity being able to actually participate in the global financial system, but it incentivizes like NGOs on the ground. They could potentially be a trust anchor. So let's just say I live in Myanmar and I'm a Rohingya. I'm not entitled to any formal identity. So that's just not possible for me. But maybe I'm a Rohingya, but I'm also a farmer who is good for 2 bushels of hay every week delivered to this NGO-sponsored body. That NGO now has a way to communicate to, let's say, their partner bank in Switzerland that, yes, fine, Suzanne doesn't have formal identity, but I can attest on her behalf that every day she shows up to my fruit stand and provides me with 2 bushels of mangoes. And then subsequently, I'm able to now participate more in the global financial system, because then perhaps that trust anchor, that bank will say, okay, fine, so let's extend a micro credit for her. Let's extend some micro loans so she can grow her fruit farming business or her hay production scheme. So that's an area that we're really quite passionate about. And also, like, for example, we've got a project going on in Afghanistan. There's a lot of women there whose husbands won't let them get identity and who just aren't entitled. But there's actually an extraordinary coding community of females that's coming up out of Afghanistan. And so now this is a way for them to work again with local NGOs or people who are trying to facilitate greater inclusion in the economy, in the global economy, for them to identify themselves. And so that's what a lot of this is about as well.
So with that example, you're really touching on the whole idea of self-sovereign identity, and the idea that when you have control of your data and you have the audit trail of the data, you have much more control of it. Can you tell us a little bit more about how that's a really important concept surrounding what you were doing at Shyft Network?
Mm-hmm. Well, we believe, your data, your personal exhaust is very valuable. There are, as we all know and have heard, in the media, there are advertisers who will pay a lot of money to understand and know what it is that you like, what it is that you don't like, what your certain patterns are for buying, etc. So when you have more control over who owns your data, you can effectively go to, especially, for example, in the cannabis space, we've had a lot of cannabis providers come to us saying, look, we really want to know how XYZ customer responds to heat after ingesting this level of CBD versus THC, but we want to make sure that we're collecting the data with their consent. So now there's a way for the end user to know where their data is going once they've consented to it, and then ultimately get kickbacks. So again, if I'm a cannabis producer and, Ryan has shown me that this is how his blood platelet levels raise when he's got X amount of CBDs in him, you can now get maybe $5 off your next purchase, etc.
Right. So we've got this great technology that a lot of people are looking at right now. Every day you hear about different consortiums that are being put together in various parts of the world. Are they talking to each other? Is there any sort of collaboration amongst these different entities?
I would say yes and no. I think everyone's still kind of gunning to be the winning chain or the winning project, but how we're looking at it, and again, because my founder, he's best friends with Brock Pierce, like the founder of EOS. He was like the third investor in Ethereum. His small network of friends who've helped us with this project believe that, look, it's not about who wins. We're only as strong as the strength of our networks. Like, if we actually want this to be a global movement, we have to be not only collaborative with the traditional institutions, but collaborative with each other, because we've all got different strengths. So I'd say that's still a work in progress.
And with respect to, the short term, medium term, long term, what are the largest impediments that you see to being able to have this solution being rolled out?
Yeah, so we were talking about this earlier. About a year ago, I would say the conversation's definitely changed in the past year. I think everyone's pretty sold on, and again, there have been reports that have been released that like 85% of enterprises agree that, yes, blockchain technology, we understand that this is relevant, this is going to impact our business, we have to invest in it, we're on board. But it's funny, because a year ago, I'd be in these calls. I remember there was one with the top 5 credit card provider, and it was their CTO and my CTO. And there's no other way to describe it than, like, I was in a conversation with like Einstein and Magneto from X-Men, 2 like brilliant people in their respective rights, but they just like could not understand what each other was saying, because there was no common language. I think that we've come a long way, and again, there's a common language now. But I think what's preventing the actual implementation is that it takes so much to align stakeholders within an organization and to get people on board.
One of the other things too is you've got your blockchain protocol, and then you've got smart contracts, you've got AI coming down the pipeline. Can you maybe just walk us through how smart contracts would be used within the Shyft network or a blockchain solution that we're talking about now?
Yeah, so smart contracts is basically it's like any sort of contract. X says he will do Y contingent on Z requirements being met. And once those requirements have been met, the smart contract is deployed, and then X gets Y, and everyone sort of gets what the terms were outlaid on the contract. But what makes it different than any other contract is that it's time-stamped onto a ledger, onto a public bulletin board that anyone can say, well, you agreed to this and you agreed to that, and that's what happened at that time on that day, so what's the issue here? Or, you agreed to this, but then this happened, so where's the disconnect? So it's a lot easier to just sort of gain transparency into what decisions were made by whom, when, and why, and what the outcome was.
So one of the things you and I were also talking about earlier on was that you've got sort of the technology component solution, but there's also the importance of making sure that all the parties that are coming to the table, whether within a private consortium or separate consortiums, understand the rules of the game. Mm-hmm. Can you talk to us about the importance of making sure there's some kind of legal or contractual framework around how all of that is actually going to work out amongst the parties?
Oh, yeah, big time. I mean, I would say we're definitely still figuring that out, and there definitely is a need for legal representation. As you're marrying these open and closed networks, there's a need for frameworks around what happens if X goes wrong, because code is not infallible. People do... things can still happen, and it's still a relatively new technology, and we haven't fully figured out, what the legal ramifications are, or who's entitled to what if, a code contract is not updated, or if a developer accidentally messes up the encryption piece of one and sends it off to another. There's definitely a need for legal intervention in terms of drafting up sort of the rules of engagement, and I would say we're all still sort of figuring that out.
I want to make sure that we leave enough time for the audience to ask some questions. We've got about 6 minutes left. Any questions that people want to raise?
Hi, thank you for the presentation. Are you familiar, or what are your views on the recently launched Verified Me from SecureKey?
Yeah, so I was just on a panel with the head identity officer of that. I was 2 days ago with that guy. I think it's great. I think it's incredibly commendable that the banks have really tried to take this on. I think that it addresses a lot of the inefficiencies within the banking network of Canada, but it's still sort of an intranet. So if they actually want to scale that technology, it's not really scalable at the moment, but perhaps maybe that's just what they want. That's how they want to keep it, but and it also doesn't address any issues about, again, unbanking the 1.7 billion. It doesn't address any issues with respect to what about that person who's not entitled to identity, or what about that person who's had their identity blown up. But I think it's a great project. Blockchain's like one piece of it, but I think it's really cool that they've been able to get together. And I think it's one of the biggest projects definitely in North America right now. So it's nice to see Canada leading that, because we had our PayPal moment about 4 years ago. Ethereum was built here. It is the second largest, most successful project in the world. We're famous in the crypto industry for Vitalik and Anthony Duro, who's also one of our investors. Coming from Canada, but we missed our PayPal moment. They've all left because we couldn't figure out regulations, we couldn't get anyone bank accounts, and so they're gone. And we've lost our ability to be those leaders in terms of job creation and innovation in the blockchain space. But again, but projects like this are bringing that sort of clout and branding back to Canada, so I think it's awesome. I think it's really cool.
Just going to wrap this up. I don't want to stand between you and a quick break, which is what we have now. So I want to thank our panelists for that very interesting discussion. And I'm told you have 7 minutes, 7-minute break.